Welcome back, Europe. We will have a specific class, a special class about Europe. First of all, people should know that Europa was the goddess of war. Okay? Of these people of the steppes. So, Europe is very, very connected to war. However, let's comment. In reality, there is no Europe. It is Eurasia. The southern part of Europe is part of the Mediterranean, West Asia, North Africa. The people, the genetics of the Mediterranean are from North Africa and from West Asia. There is a little bit of genetics in Europe of the ancient hybrid Neanderthals who lived in Europe, but they were very, very few. The people began to migrate to Europe from the Near East 5,000 years ago, and then the Indo-Aryans, Indo-Tocharians, Indo-Iranians 3,000 years ago. They started arriving. The Europeans themselves had no concept of Europe. Whatever people have read about Europe is a total lie. A total lie. The concept of Europe was born in the Middle Ages, 1500, 1600. For 1,500 years, they had no concept of the globe. They had no concept of the world outside of Europe. And for the first 1,000 years, it was Mediterranean culture. First the Greeks and then the Romans. And a large part of Rome are Greek colonies and Phoenician colonies who came from India. The Phoenicians are the descendants of the Assyrians, of the Mitanni, of the Hittites, of the Indo-Europeans that exited from India. So the so-called European culture was not European, it was Roman. For 1,000 years, the Romans inherited the Mediterranean culture. The people who lived in the Italian peninsula were Etruscans, Turks. They had a Tyrrhenian Sea, the Turanian Sea. The culture of Turan, they came over and settled in this region. It was an extension of West Asia, just like Troy, just like Phoenicia, just like Carthage, which the Phoenicians colonized. So for 1,000 years, the extension of Western Asia was the Mediterranean. No concept of Europe. You had a few tribes, a few Germanic tribes that started arriving, and the Romans colonized the Indo-European Celts, and the Indo-European Saxons, who were beginning to arrive in Europe. A few people who lived in the north of Europe, Vikings, they were very, very few people. The population of Europe began to grow after the first millennia BC, when the Ice Age started receding and all this region started having agriculture and migrants from the Asian steppe. The Celts, the Saxons, these are migrants from the Asian steppes. When the ice receded, these people came and inhabited empty spaces. There is no history of Germanic people invading Europe and having millions of people that they conquered. There was nothing. The Black Forest had a few boars. The northern regions had a few trolls, big gigantic people. So Rome was the basis of what happened in Europe for 1,000 years. They assimilated the Etruscan culture, and 500 years after Rome, the Mediterranean was interconnected. They had Syrians, they had Jewish people, Hebrews, they had Egyptians, they had Parthians, Moors, everybody was trading. It was the extension of West Asia and North Asia. This was Roman civilization. The richest part of Rome was the eastern Mediterranean, the Aegean Sea. The western part was almost uninhabited. When you read the stories of Asterix, you have some very primitive Gaulish tribes, and the Romans are coming in with their army and their organization and their order. In fact, people have got it wrong. The word Pax Romana does not mean the Roman order. It means the Roman peace. People should study more, should learn more. The North European scientists had no clue of Greek and Roman, Latin. No clue. We have to understand why. And I will explain. So the Romans brought the Mediterranean civilization to Northern Europe, which is France, Germany, the British Isles. There was no civilization there. There were tribes killing themselves, surviving. Then the Hunnic horde invaded from Asia. The spillover of grasslands, of Mongol Hunnic populations increasing, Turkic populations increasing. A lot of people, they conquered the whole Eurasian belt and came and conquered Rome and conquered Eastern Europe. And according to so-called European historians who are clueless, they disappeared and lost, and that was it. All wrong. For another 500 years, you had Hunnic empires. The Avars, the Hungars, the Bulgars, and the Khazars. All these people who survived for another 500, 700 years and have become Eastern Europeans were Hunnic people. The word Hungary starts with Huns. The Huns settled into Central Europe, and the Central European people, as they are discovering today, are basically connected to the Orient. They are of Turkic Hunnic origin. They have some Viking influence, and we will explain why. Okay, so the Huns destroyed the Roman Empire, and the Hunnic empires controlled Central and Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, we had a total collapse after Rome, and then we had the Goths and Visigoths and Vandals who were expelled from Asia, Central Asia, and migrated to Europe, running away from the Huns. They were escaping the Hunnish horde. So they entered into Western Europe. And at this moment, the history of Western Europe begins. We can begin at 500 AD, when the Goths and the Visigoths defeat Rome, and then the Huns defeat Rome. And we have to remember that the Goths and Visigoths were allies of Rome. Attila's Hunnic confederacy included Indo-Iranian Alans, included Gothic tribes who had exited India 1,000 years ago, and included Hunnic Turkic tribes. And all of them got together. How did they get together? They were the same people. As I commented, the Huns, the Mongols, the Turks mixed with the Indo-Europeans, who were Indo-Tocharians, Indo-Iranians. They all mixed in the Eurasian plain. The concept of Europe began Western Europe after the fall of Rome. A few tribes got together, became so-called Christians, because it was useful to them to show to the other tribes that they're more civilized. So we had 500 years of Gothic wars, the barbarian wars, where the so-called barbarian tribes killed each other for survival. So we had the Alans, we had the Goths, the Visigoths, and the Langobards, and all of these Germanic people. Then, from the 9th century, 10th century, the Viking invasions began. And for 500 years, not 200 years as people think, the Viking invasions continued because their descendants in Normandy, in Russia, the Rus means the boat people, the Vikings. They continued dominating, coming down and down. So the European culture was born, the Germanic culture and the Viking culture. These people were not very educated or sophisticated, but they had contact with Rome and with Byzantium, which was the Eastern Roman Empire. It was an Oriental civilization. It was not European. So enter the Vikings, dominating Europe, and now the European culture is born. Piracy and non-stop war. Welcome to our next video, because we will explain what happened for the next 500 years.